Watchers International with Mae Brussell, who for over 17 years has investigated and exposed political conspiracies worldwide. World Watchers International originates at KLRB, Carmel, California. Here's Mae.
Good evening. I'm hearing this squeak in the earphones here. This is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California. It's broadcast number 462, and it's October the 12th, 1980. Are you hearing this squeak on the air? I can't tell. It's in the earphones here. Trouble with the control panel. As usual, we sometimes have trouble. Everything is fine and under control, and we'll get on with the broadcast. I'm going to discuss the election because it comes up in a month now, less than a month, and I've gone into various tapes, broadcasts on Jimmy Carter, the narcotic connections, a few in depth on Ronald Reagan. But the elections are just a process that happens every 4 years. It doesn't really shape America fundamentally the way it should be shaped, because the candidates are handpicked by a select few that do not address themselves to what I personally consider the major issues during the election time, the things that they should be talking about. The choices this year are particularly dangerous and particularly pathetic. Dangerous because I've watched the career of Ronald Reagan and lived through the experiences of his being governor in California, and nobody opposing Ronald Reagan has addressed themselves to the problems that he presented to this state or that he will present to the nation. When a few thinking people come along, such as Woodrow Wilson or Franklin Roosevelt or Adlai Stevenson or John Kennedy, they're either poisoned or they're shot or they're given CIA heart attacks after lunch or they're blown up. They simply can't live, and there's no way that they can survive unless they oppose the Soviet Union and intend to make World War III against the Soviet Union. There are no peace candidates in the offing, and there never will be. And the tragedy is that these dogs, I can't call them men, they're dogs, are hell-bent on another destructive war. From a practical point of view, I prefer to think of the two major candidates, Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan. I think there is a difference between them and Jack Anderson. I'll have a few remarks to make and not too much in the weeks to come. There are decisions such as Supreme Court justices' opinions on health and safety, freedom of religion, control over your own body. And I have a list of 16 or 18 subjects that I think are important to the period that we're living in right now, and briefly can run down what each candidate will do towards these critical problems. They are critical problems, and I have no intention of telling you how to vote, not even people that I know very well, because I know that they don't take an opinion of anybody. Your mind is probably made up in advance right now who you're going to vote for. People aren't swayed by logic or reason or research or facts or guesses or opinions based upon reading a lot of material and a lot of books. You know what you want, so primarily this evening, because I'm asked, who am I going to vote for and what do I think is going to happen, I'm going to give you my opinion. I'm not going to tell you what to do because realistically, you already know, I'm pretty sure, what you want to do. What are the issues? The campaign rhetoric out on the streets hits inflation, energy, employment, war preparedness, and strong military. Outside of that, they're not handling very many of the issues. Religion in school, Ronald Reagan is going for. But the real issues, the ones that I see, is making the headlines every day, the problems that confront the citizens of the United States or the citizens of the earth are not being spoken about, or they're not being asked the questions, at least from what I'm reading and hearing, radio, TV, and on the newspapers and the magazines. My version of the issues is different than the ones that I listed above. Inflation is difficult, but pumping money into weapons and debts, into the trillion-dollar debts, is ridiculous. The interest on the debts and the cost of wars is never discussed. They discuss going to World War III and new arms and new weapons and new gases, but never the total bankruptcy of this country after the wars that we've been in, or the bankruptcy of the world because of the weapon systems that we've built. Unemployment can be solved. If you have a war, you could get rid of 60 or 70 million of your citizens. There'd be fewer jobs and less housing to worry about, less health to worry about. People that make wars don't worry about those people that go out to fight it. And that's one way to solve unemployment. As far as energy, the candidates talk about energy sources. When they get the war they want and they're edging towards it every day a little closer, the military will get the energy first. The planes, the boats, and we will be cut off from each other, but they will get the energy first. I feel that war against Russia is impossible. And when I'm asked the question, don't you think we should get stronger to confront Russia? My answer is that we are weak because we're weak internally, not for anything that Russia does. We're weak because of the way our system was set up, the rounding up of Indians into concentration camps, the importation of black slaves, the continuous political assassination of our leaders, putting in military dictatorships that require more police, using the atomic bomb when we didn't have to, killing our civil rights leaders, using agent provocateurs to supply narcotics throughout every city in the country, purposely inducing young people into prostitution, narcotics, and gambling, baiting them to waste money they don't have to get into debt. I think we are crumbling not because Russia is stronger than us, but that we're weaker than we ever were. We're giving in to the worst elements, a country run mainly by a lot of criminals, assassins, people that cover up assassinations. That's my view of the United States of America. In order to be strong in the world, we have to clean up our act. And I don't mean the fundamentalist church story of family and God. I mean just basic morality that has to do with justice and fairness, murders, drugs, pimps, pushing drugs into the high schools, the middle schools, even children, and letting the large drug dealers leave. The only arrests that are taking place as far as narcotics go are the homegrown marijuana crops, where they come in and take the small dealer that supplies the local neighborhood, it seems. That bravado image that the United States has that having weapons will make us strong, I do not believe will make us strong. I think, as I said, we're morally and spiritually bankrupt, and our population, our young people, are turned away, they're apathetic, and therefore they are given a new genocidal future hope, which is the space age, which is being pushed to them, to go to space stations, to work, to take the minerals off the moon, get off the planet, as if the same people that pollute the planet are building the space stations. So that the imagination of the young people is either to cop out totally, turn against everything around them, and take the easy out, the marijuana, the cocaine, the dope, or just loaf around unmotivated, totally unmotivated, or those that are athletic or into jogging or sports, keep them active with their athletics, or go to the moon, or a combination. That's about what is available for the youth. As far as an independent vote, I get calls. I got one this morning from somebody in Sacramento. He says, I can't vote for any of the candidates because they're members of the Trilateral Commission. Jimmy Carter, the incumbent, is a member of David Rockefeller's Trilateral Commission. John Anderson is a member of the commission. And George Bush, as vice president under Ronald Reagan, is a member of the Trilateral Commission. Therefore, I will vote for Mr. Clark or Barry Commoner because I don't want a trilateral. Well, my answer to that logic is that any vote for an independent is a vote for Ronald Reagan. If you take your vote away from Jimmy Carter, it's okay to do it. I'm not telling you not to, but any vote for the independent is a vote for Ronald Reagan for sure. Another thing is that Ronald Reagan is 70 years old when he gets into office. Every 20 years with the number 0 in it, that person dies in office. So there are already discussions about his old age or the fact that nobody survives that year when it has a 0 in it. And that leaves George Bush a trilateralist. So if you're voting independent, you're putting in Reagan and you end up with Bush. So there's no escaping the Trilateral Commission if that's what you want. And if you don't like Bush, you better do a little research, or if you don't know anything about him, read about his being an officer of the Republican Campaign Committee at the time of Watergate, his being director of the CIA when Allende was killed in Chile, his ignoring the scandals of the Central Intelligence Agency, the assassination squads, ambassador to China, getting China psychologically ready as they state now that they're ready for World War III or that War III is inevitable, and getting China prepared to be armed by the United States. Bush left the groundwork for that billion people to be armed and supplied with weapons, and all hell will break loose when that happens. So a vote for independent is giving Reagan the vote, and when Reagan's in, he can be offed, and there goes Bush. Also, a lot of people think if I vote for an independent candidate, I'm exerting my individuality. I don't like either of the major candidates, therefore I'm saying I'm an individual. That's a bunch of BS. It doesn't work that way. You're giving it to Wall Street firms either way. You have choices. If you give it to Ronald Reagan by voting independent, the vice president then was turned down as governor of Texas, as a senator from Texas. They didn't want him in his own state. He was accepted by the intelligence community, and that's what you get. That isn't a free choice. It's about identical to having your driver's license expire, and you say, well, I'm going to go in on Monday or I'm going to go in on Thursday. The choices have to be made one way or the other, and you really don't have free choices in this case when you go for the independent. My view of John Anderson is different than a lot of you. A lot of you like him. I think he's a total flake. I haven't mentioned him on any of the programs until now. He could have stayed in the Republican Party if he wanted any kind of changes of a liberal sort, but until the elections came, Anderson was never even considered a liberal. People have researched quotations of Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, and they go into the past for every little crumb they threw out. How come people don't go into the past of John Anderson? How did he just wake up in 1980 and become a liberal? He was put into power as a member of the Trilateral by David Rockefeller. He's part of that Bilderberger, Rockefeller, New York establishment elite. John Anderson always has been. He was gung-ho in Congress during the Vietnam War. He's this year's Eugene McCarthy. McCarthy was described in the book Who's Who in the CIA as being a member of the intelligence community, and in the past elections he would surface with his flower power and take votes away from Democrats. That's how Richard Nixon got in power in 1968, was that Eugene McCarthy was traveling around the country putting blue daisies on Volkswagen cars and telling them that represented peace and love, while they put in the man that was to bomb Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam. Why are the Trilateralists angry at Jimmy Carter at this time? I've mentioned it at other times in other broadcasts. Why would they put George Bush in as vice president under Reagan, knowing that old goat will expire or pass out, or push John Anderson against Carter? Well, Carter didn't do everything they wanted for them. He was a naughty boy. He let Somoza out of Nicaragua and the Shah out of Iran, and he didn't send in troops to protect those countries. And these nations have big investments in those countries, in banking investments and weapon investments, and also in the Middle East. The power structure is there to hold its profits and to supply strong police and torture and dictatorships, and they're not there to let their boys be eased out of office, and the Shah and Somoza are now dead. So Jimmy Carter went against the policies of his bosses in that respect, if for nothing else. He also did some other no-nos, such as indicting Carlos Marcello of organized crime and Irv Davidson of the Pentagon, of the National Security Agency, and set up Abscam for 90 separate investigations of labor and corporate and congressional links to mob and organized crime. So while Jimmy Carter's pretty bad, he did do quite a few things that were off the record from what Chase Manhattan and the huge multinational corporations want. In 1970, going back 10 years ago, John Anderson was in the House of Representatives, and he gave a speech about the radical liberals. He said, in quotes, They were suddenly scrambling to get on their record that they were hardline advocates of law and order. Some of our greatest advocates of civil license have suddenly seen political light. There's a list of quotations of John Anderson's Anthony Lewis had in the New York Times this last week. He was praising the law and order under Richard Nixon and John Mitchell and thinking that the radical liberals getting on the law and order issue were seeing the light. In 1964, he entered into the Congressional Record praise for a man, Representative Ralph Behrman from Nebraska. Behrman got on the Congressional Record on the floor of Congress and denounced the appointment of law professor Norman Redlich to the Warren Commission to investigate the president of John Kennedy. He said Redlich was engaged in a communist front activities and he shouldn't be on the Warren Commission. The truth is, Redlich, who's now Dean of Law at New York University Law School, is the most conservative person you can imagine in the world, and everyone on the Warren Commission, according to the minutes of the commission, were members of the Central Intelligence Agency, the secretaries, the staff, and so forth. But Anderson praised the congressman from Nebraska for denouncing Redlich for being a red when he was so far right, and later he apologized. He said that he wasn't putting aspersions on Norman Redlich, but he was praising the right of this other representative to speak up and speak his piece if he thought Redlich was redneck or associated with communist fronts, which he wasn't. At the time of the civil rights strife in the South in 1963, when Meredith was trying to get into a university and the blacks were trying to get educated in the South, John Anderson inserted in the Congressional Record a letter published in Oregon, Illinois, saying, in quotes, "The Southern Negro is 50 to 100 years behind the white community, and with rare exception, almost totally unprepared for equality. Education should be tried," this minister from Illinois wrote, an Anderson buddy, I guess, but he said the Negro, by and large, is supinely indifferent to education. Anderson thought that this was so impressive that he had this entered into the Congressional Record as part of his attitude towards blacks and getting their schooling in 1963. He just said a short while ago on the campaign trail that if he had a chance, he would vote again for the Gulf of Tonkin, the measure that increased the war in Southeast Asia and later admittedly was a fluke, that the radar had been picked up of our own equipment on the boat and the escalation of the war wasn't necessary. He still doesn't know that, evidently, in 1970. And when President Nixon ordered the invasion of Cambodia, in 1970, Anderson defended the president August 5th, 1970, and he thought it was a great thing to go in and bomb Cambodia at that time. And he felt that the heat should be applied, against Cambodia. He also praised J. Edgar Hoover on his 40th birthday as director of the FBI, and he said, in quotes, "At this time in our history when a tide of humanistic secularism seems to be sweeping over America, it is immensely reassuring to find the figure of Mr. Hoover, with his prestige and authority, standing squarely as only a Christian America can continue to survive storms buffeting the world. Only Christian America can stand up against the storms," and he praised J. Edgar Hoover, who was a outright Christian, a good Christian, when we had humanistic secularism. So if you want Anderson, I'm not telling you not to vote him. You vote for him, you get Reagan. So if you get Reagan, that's what you deserve. I say that every week, and if people don't wake up to that, then they have to live with it later. Just don't come and cry about Ronald Reagan later, because any vote away from Jimmy Carter, unfortunately, is giving it to Ronald Reagan. Senator Lowell Weicker in Hartford, Connecticut, Republican from Connecticut, said he would campaign for Ronald Reagan for President of the United States, even though he considers the party platform is a disgrace. And he said he thought that George Bush was a liar and a hypocrite, so he wouldn't campaign for Bush. Weicker was on the Senate Watergate Committee. He said he didn't like Ronald Reagan. He differed with him on the major issues and so forth, but he has integrity, and he says he has no use for Bush, Republican National Chairman, in the Watergate scandal. A vote for Reagan for Senator Weicker is a vote for Bush. If he thinks Bush is a liar and a hypocrite and he doesn't like anything on the Republican platform because it's a disgrace, there's no obligation for him to vote at all, but he's going to vote for Ronald Reagan. As I said before, I've listed my priorities of what I consider to be important in an election year or not in an election year. What will they do when the election is over and you have 4 years of these characters? I look at the newspaper and think of what I see in the newspaper and how they dress themselves to these problems. The first problem I listed, and these aren't in any special order, but I listed for you what I consider the major problems, and if I had Meet the Press or Face the Nation, I would address each candidate to these problems, and one has to do with what are the chances of World War III. Ronald Reagan has a group that have been dedicated to the fact that they want World War III and have wanted it since 1918, the group from the Hoover Institute and the military behind Ronald Reagan. On the other hand, Jimmy Carter is fully supporting the Shah of Iran. He did over in Egypt and Sadat. He's very close to them, and the Shah's twin sister has put up a huge fortune of money to Iraq, and I believe that she can be instigating the problems in the Middle East at this time, which would give a chance to go into Iran and make war against Iran. She hopefully wants her nephew, the Shah's son, on the throne. The Carter administration with Turple and Corcola and Cummings hasn't been any different than past administrations were supplying the armies of Gaddafi and the Amin Uganda and PLO. The CIA is funding the armies all over the Middle East and Southeast Asia, and now want to send arms to China. So the chance of World War III, I think, would be more imminent with Ronald Reagan, and it would take a little longer under the Carter plans, the way he moves more cautiously and slowly. I think housing is a problem that I haven't heard the candidates address themselves. Can you own your home? Are you losing your home? Will you have a dwelling? Can you save enough through the system to pay rent or to put money down for a home? What are the chances of having homes to live in? Because the quality of life is what matters for all of us. You can't live in bombshells or empty space rockets and missile silos. What are they building for people to live in while we defend ourselves or arm against Russia? The news media and the control of the news media is important. How open are the radio stations, the TV channels, magazines, books? I don't think there's much difference between if Carter were president or Ronald Reagan. I think that Wall Street controls the media at both ends and around the country, except for small independent stations such as KLRB and college stations, a handful of stations around the country. I don't think it would make much difference. In terms of education, is it going to be more elitist? How are the test scores screened? Who's screening out? What is the cost of education? We know that Ronald Reagan broke the back of the University of California, where they were to have free education for everyone out of high school in California, and that was cut off thanks to Reagan when he was governor those 8 years. Jimmy Carter is not outspoken one way or the other about education. I really can't say anything for or against his views on education. Ronald Reagan is for funding tax-free the Catholic schools, the religious schools, to educate the students there and give them a tax break. That means that the Christians are separated from the others and the white Christians are separated from the minorities, and the private schools will flourish, and the elite system will continue as people pull their children into the private schools to keep them away from the masses. They do it here in Carmel. They do it in every major city around the country, and if they get tax breaks, you'll get more of it. What about medical control, the spread of diseases and the genetic experiments that are going on? This week there was a revelation that genetic experiments are coming out of UCLA. They're doing them overseas. I've made allegations that they're linked to Jonestown. They're working with diseases of minorities, and I think that they're a threat to the safety of the United States, the DNA, the genetic experiments, and I haven't heard anybody ask the candidates on these subjects. When Jonestown came down, Jimmy Carter said, let's not overreact, and he didn't care about investigating if these people were under experiments of mind control or body experiments or genetic experiments. He simply ignored the issue and hushed it up, whereas Ronald Reagan set up the body at UCLA that was connected to Yale University that initially began the experiments on minorities. This school at Yale that's doing genetic work is working on sickle cell anemia, and I've been afraid for a long time that Tay-Sachs, allegedly a Jewish disease, and sickle cell for the blacks would later be used for extermination purposes. And they admitted, as I say, it's not allowed in this country to do this kind of work. They admitted they're doing it overseas. How about mass mind control? In the hospitals, the Vacaville, the various institutions and prisons and private homes, the kind of thing that Jim Jones was doing in the churches, which president would use mind control the most? It got its start and its muscle heavily under the Ronald Reagan administration, and particularly California, that was the home of the mass violences and these assassins under the process of mind control. But we've seen it go east, and cases come up like David Berkowitz in New York City, the son of Sam, or the new diary that was found of Arthur Bremmers, and victims, assassination victims, who have been in the process of mind control. The murder of Alan Lowenstein, former congressman, by this Sweeney and Dennis Sweeney and Gene Harris, killing Dr. Tanauer in New York. So under Jimmy Carter's administration, he hasn't done a thing to get to the bottom of any of these murders. I'm just mentioning a few. I have a list of about 40 or 50 where Jimmy Carter just ignores them. Ronald Reagan was behind them, and that makes a big difference. And I want to do a little more, if I have time, on Dr. Delgado and UCLA and the mind control. How about transportation costs, the fuel? Jimmy Carter released the lid on oil, so the oil profits went up. That's the one way he served his masters well. The fuel situation, the many oil people, of course, are behind Ronald Reagan, the Murchisons and John Connolly and Bush from Texas and Buckley, and there's many, many oil firms and oil families. I haven't any reason to believe that the price of energy won't keep going up, that the same multinationals and military that gobble up the oil and allow the oil prices to rise will not be generous with us on the oil. And when we finally need alternate sources of energy, whether it's solar or the alcohol or gasohol, it'll go to the hands of the monopolies to develop also. How about narcotics and organized crime? How do the candidates relate to the importation of heroin and cocaine and marijuana? Well, that problem has increased about 40% since Jimmy Carter was president. He's allowed narcotics to come in from Colombia and Bolivia, even though he's not recognizing Bolivia at the time. They pour into Miami, and on the one hand, he has the Abscam arrest for a handful of dealers, but the 33 informers in the New Mexico jail who could really lead muscle to arrest of narcotic dealers was allowed to take place. They were murdered, and the president has never said a word about the investigation into New Mexico. Nobody was punished, and obviously no one was fired, probably moved around or shifted a little. So as far as the organized crime and narcotics, Jimmy Carter's family has strong links to crime figures. Ruth Stapleton to a fellow down in San Luis Obispo who was investigated, Billy Carter to the Middle East narcotics combinations, the Vesco connections in Panama, and with not only with Billy Carter, but with the White House administration, Ham Jordan with Trujillo. The organized crime is in. The mob seems to control both candidates. I'm going to take a break now for 60 seconds or so, and then on the second half, we'll go into some of what I consider the issues and how the candidates don't even address them. Okay, It's Mae Brussell, and we're back on the second half of this program, side 2 of tape 462, talking about the presidential candidates. I think one of the primary problems, this has been repeated over and over again, and I can do more tapes on it if you want, is the selection of the justices of the Supreme Court. That is the biggie. That is the problem of selecting Ronald Reagan as president. And as I say, if you get the independent or the Anderson ticket, be ready for the candidate that wins to be Ronald Reagan, and then he has control of the justices. The current justices are old men, way in their 70s, except for 2 of them. Their decisions are vital, and that is the way we will have to live with these people for a long, long time. So the biggest argument, I suppose number 1 or 2 after the chances of who would go to war the first, would be the justices of the Supreme Court. The youngest one, Mr. Rehnquist, is 56. He was put in by Richard Nixon. And Byron White is 63. He was put in 1962 by John Kennedy. But Mr. Brennan is 74, and Harry Blackmun is 71. Warren Burger, 73. Lewis Powell, 73. Potter Stewart, 72. And Jon Stewart, 69, put in by Gerald Ford. So if you want, several of these are not well, they're old men. Imagine that 5 of them are way past 70. The President of the United States is going to be 70, and Blackburn is 71. Those are the decisions. Ronald Reagan once said that the justices should be on the board of corporations, head of corporations. They don't have to be lawyers, don't have to know law, and so forth. And I think that this is really one of the big decisions that will affect our life. Another issue which none of the candidates are ever asked, that is so well concealed, and I will be doing many broadcasts in the future, I hope, are the new moon laws and the space policies, the politics of space, the weapons, whether the labor camps can be inspected, whether the third world will get any of the minerals from space. Are the space colonies going to be isolated without inspection of who goes up there? Who decides who goes there? The book Alternative 3 described batch consignments of slave labor. If NASA and Nazis and people that used slave labor before and are using it today want to explore these colonies and build colonies on the moon and off of the moon, put other space stations orbiting up there, what are their attitudes about the new moon law before the United Nations? Why is it being stalled until after the election? Will it be sabotaged so that moon wars or weapon wars, space wars, will be possible, so that slave labor camps will be possible, so the third world gets no benefits from it? These treaties were supposed to have been signed recently, and they've been stalled by the L5 Society that wants total control of the space stations that are going to be built. And they're run by Barry Goldwater, the head of the L5 Society, and we'll do more. That is a question that people are so ignorant about that they can't even ask the candidates. Now, what would Jimmy Carter do, and what would Ronald Reagan do? Reagan's gang and Goldwater and the military and the space scientists behind him would negate the current treaties and go totally for the politics of space and make it as far right as it can go. Jimmy Carter so far has not pressed to sign the space treaty or the moon treaty, opening it up to all countries and the third world, the minerals and so forth that belong to all mankind. He stays neutral. If I had a scale of 1 to 10, I drew it out, of what is bad about a candidate, like 10, from 1 to 10, 10 being the worst, I'd say Ronald Reagan would get a 10 on the space program, and Jimmy Carter would get like a 3 or 5, simply because he ignores it. He can't get a perfect score because he won't speak out for what is right, but he just ignores these issues, whereas the people behind Ronald Reagan are really pushing this. The money into the space program has been very minimal in the last 5 or 6 years, except for millions of dollars into security so that nobody will know what's going on once the space program, outer space program, begins. And for those of you who are not familiar with my past radio programs, I'll have to go at length into the space problem with you, because right now. It may sound new to you, but they are planning space colonies built by the multinational aerospace corporations, designed by Gerard O'Neill at Princeton, and they're working full speed to get those built. Another problem is unnecessary treatments in hospitals and with doctors, care for the poor, the elderly in the homes, medical costs, rising medical costs, and breaking the back of the drug companies and their monopolies, keeping control over our bodies. I don't know that Jimmy Carter has done much for medical programs or to lower the cost of medicine. As governor of California, I can tell you that Ronald Reagan had no use for the old or the poor or the student or the minority. They come last, and the Lockheed, Boeing, Rockwell, so forth, NASA, and the mind control people, those doctors came first. He had no use for these people. As far as employment, the wider gap between the rich and poor, there are no solutions right now. Jimmy Carter has none. The unemployment among blacks is growing. The cities are filled with unemployed youth. There don't seem to be solutions on the one hand when Jimmy Carter's president, but it's even more scary what the things that Ronald Reagan could do. I have the feeling that his full employment will be putting them into the military and sending them off to war. Another issue in my mind is, what is our relationship to other countries? Jimmy Carter didn't like the Russians going to Afghanistan, so he didn't allow Americans to go into the Olympic Games. Ronald Reagan said we should invade Cuba to show the Russians what it was like because they went into Afghanistan. Two of the men in Ronald Reagan's advisory capacity are lobbyists for Taiwan. He's very close to Taiwan and the son of Chiang Kai-shek and the repressive regimes there. Two military dictatorships went out, Somoza and the Shah, while Jimmy Carter was president, and there was the assassination in South Korea of the president of South Korea. Right now, another dictatorship has come in his power, and in Bolivia, another dictatorship has come, and in Turkey there was a coup. So the United States saw 3 military coups come, 2 left and 3 came. The repressions in Argentina have reduced in the last year or so. Maybe 24 people are missing, but up to last year, 15,000 people are still not accounted for in Argentina. Dr. Joseph Mengele was experimenting on Indians in Paraguay, an American citizen that worked with Adolf Hitler at Auschwitz. Nobody has spoken up about Paraguay being a place that the president should not recognize. We have dealings with these military dictatorships such as Brazil and Paraguay. Brazil wants money. They're bankrupt. Most of the industrialized nations are in total bankruptcy because they've done nothing but prepare, as I say, for World War III, and that just simply will not put enough people to work or support economies such as homes and other types of employment. Brazil is asking for millions of dollars of world money from the World Bank this year. I just saw an article this week, and then another article in the I think it was in the New York Times. Brazil now only has 2 political prisoners, or released their last political prisoner. Well, Brazil has death squads like the Los Angeles Police Department or other police departments in the country, so they send out their team to murder a suspect or a liberal or a newspaper man or somebody selling papers. They have murdered every person that they would have taken to jail, so they only have 2 political prisoners. It's like in Chile when Pinochet came into power and he took so many people to prison and was torturing them that the United States and Amnesty International and the UN were criticizing that Nazi regime. So in the New England Journal of Medicine, it said that Pinochet was giving a deadly chemical to prisoners and then releasing them, and 3 years later their livers would shrink up and they wouldn't be alive. So how does the United States relate to these countries? Jimmy Carter does not recognize Bolivia and the dictatorship at this time. Ronald Reagan and George Bush said that we shouldn't meddle in other people's affairs. Ronald Reagan and Bush believe that military dictatorships are fine if they're over there and it's none of their business, but neither one will admit that we trained their police department, that we sent the torture weapons over there, that we sent AID over with agents to teach them how to do it, So the issue is which man would stay away from internal affairs if a dictator fled, such as the Shah or Somoza. Jimmy Carter didn't go to war. He didn't send in troops. The Sandinistas were joyful to get Somoza out, and the Iranians were joyful to get the Shah out, as strange as that may seem to some people. And we didn't send in troops, so I think there is a difference between the candidates. Not on everything here, as I say before, it's the effect on the media or narcotics, links to organized crime, a lot of factors. They're equal in their evilness or in their strength, but in some things they make a difference, and one of them is the military dictatorships. Ronald Reagan's gang are anxious to resume all trade, all dealings with South Africa. Up to this point, Jimmy Carter has stayed arm's distance from South Africa, and the Reagan team are anxious to combine the link of Brazil, Argentina, and South Africa, and that, of course, brings in that Nazi connection through all of South America and then spreads from Zaire and Africa and so forth. So Ronald Reagan, as far as other countries is concerned, is horrible. How about general health, the air, acid rain, abortion, safety, your body? That, again, is another big difference in candidates. I see it. Right away, Reagan wants to take away OSHA, the Occupational Safety Administration, the group that is investigating the poisonings at jobs and occupational hazards of sterility or asbestos, and working at shipyards and in offices where there's fluorescent lights, or poisons in your food, the chemicals from farming. Ronald Reagan, for that alone, besides the fact that he would be lovely to lead forward as Commander-in-Chief of World War III, and has no provisions for housing or education, and is behind medical and experiments and mind control, his attitude about our bodies is another reason to not vote, I believe, for Ronald Reagan. That even though they balance up even on some things, he tilts it way over here. Jimmy Carter never said he'd take away the standards for occupational safety. Now, he hasn't been rigorous in prosecuting corporations where there's known cancers and known sterilizations and so forth. He's had a hands-off in a way, but sometimes I think in an election year, if you make the corporate structure too mad, you're sure not to get elected. So he can't have a vigorous application of some of the investigations that he could do in a last term. As far as abortions, I can't believe if 50% of the women in this country vote and 50% of those are able to have children. That's still a large percentage. I can't imagine any one of them staying home from the polls, but some of these people today are so dumb that they're home getting pregnant thinking that they can have an abortion if they get knocked up, and Reagan's making a law that they can't have that abortion, and they don't even know Reagan's doing it. Some poor woman's going to wake up 2 months from now and want to check in for an abortion and find Reagan's president and didn't even know his stand. People aren't educated on the issues. They're not even listening to the dumb talk shows as controlled as they are, and they're not reading the newspapers. Even the most simplistic newspaper has some of these basic questions about your own body and the occupational hazards. Any working person who works with lead paints or in paint factories or in offices or any place where there's insulation or fire retardants or chemical firms, and goodness knows we have plenty of those, or Livermore Lab or wherever where you have large increases of cancer, any one of those people, I should think, would vote against Ronald Reagan's views on those things. But I know that when the voting's over and the polls close, I can sit back and say, well, that's what they want, that's what they get. As far as religious freedom, that's another problem. Having church in the school, the fundamentalists, according to the Ronald Reagan's team, say everybody should pray in school, but if you don't want to pray, if you're an atheist or one of those that don't want to pray, just step out of the room. Can you see your child humiliated because you influence what your child thinks? They don't know the difference. They're 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 14 years old, and they go to a class and you're against prayer in school, and they have to say a little prayer in their prayer time so that 20 or 30 children put their head down and say their prayer and 2 leave the room. The teacher knows they're not praying. The other students know they're not praying. They can be picked on. They're singled out unless they just sit there and close their eyes and mumble their lips. But the prayer in school is one thing. The tax deductions to separate the private schools and separate the white Christians from the masses is being encouraged. And then Ronald Reagan belongs to that team set up in Dallas, the supporters that want to turn the entire world Christian. That's Leon Jaworski from the Warren Commission and John Connolly from Texas and Clement Stone and a whole team of who's who, Gerald Ford, I can name the Murchisons, the whole group that were involved in the Kennedy assassination, the cover-up of John Kennedy, also are in a fundamentalist group that want to raise billions of dollars, turn China and Taiwan, Africa, Asia, all of them to Christians, and other than Christians could vote for these candidates. I can't believe, but they'll vote for Anderson. They'll vote for the independent. They're going to go out or not vote at all and do as they please, and they're really not aware of these issues. That's why I'm bringing them up for you tonight and for those of you that subscribe to my tapes so that you know what I think some of the issues are. I don't know the last word of what each candidate would think or do, but I only know by their past performance and up till this moment what they are doing. As far as protection of savings and investment, that's a problem. And I know that under Jimmy Carter and under Ronald Reagan, we have Howard Rupp and these analysts. They're on the radio, they're on television, they have newsletters on how to get your T-bill accounts, what to do with your savings. Do you buy gold? Do you buy silver? When do you sell? Do you get blue chip stocks? Is real estate good to invest in? They're appealing to a group of people that are going to stay rich no matter which candidate is in. And that's an important point. Certain candidates, Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, are going to keep one element of society isolated and protected and wealthy. The chances are they will. If there's a depression, there's still a handful of people where the property never drops in value. I lived in Beverly Hills during the last depression, and I never knew there was a depression. There was no depression in Beverly Hills. The homes were the same price. Nothing dropped. There wasn't less food. There wasn't less money. We didn't take fewer trips. I was born in 1922, but sailed through the Depression, and except for a few songs or jokes, I didn't know what it was. So people that live in Pebble Beach or Long Island or Beverly Hills or wherever, it doesn't affect them. The main thing is, can you save any money with these men as President of the United States? Is there any way for you to earn money? Is there any way to save it? The only way to earn it is to get education, mainly. And we know Ronald Reagan cut off your education so that your earning potential is out. Another way to earn is to take tests that you pass so you increase your ability to earn. And the CIA at Princeton University helps write those tests to make sure you don't get those tests passed. They screen you at the test level. They screen you at real estate offices, so if you earn it, you can't move in the neighborhoods, and make sure that the investments are for a few. So the main thing is to vote for a candidate that will give you an opportunity to earn without being hassled. And I do think that there is more opportunity in the United States today, even under the Carter administration, to earn. If you're not lazy, you can go out there and earn and fight the system still. I think it will be a lot harder under Ronald Reagan. He talks about welfare cheaters and people driving up in Cadillacs for their welfare money, but he hasn't provided any alternative when he was governor those 8 years, or suggestions of ways of getting off welfare or programs to get you off welfare. He would laugh at those and think that those are hypocritical, but he suggests lowering the minimum wage and putting you to work. You can go to work for $2 an hour. The other factor are, there's two factors, the hidden people behind the president, because they're really just a bunch of Pinocchios on screens that with strings attached to them. Who pulls the strings? Which corporations? It's bigger than One's a Pepsi-Cola president, Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon, put in by the Pepsi-Cola people, and the other's a Coca-Cola president, Jimmy Carter, with Coca-Cola and headquarters in Georgia. It's more than Pepsi versus Coca. Who is behind the candidates? What military people, what defense officials? Those officials had positions before, like Admiral Moore is behind Ronald Reagan's campaign. Moore was a man who was stealing from Richard Nixon's desk and was never prosecuted, with a man named Yeoman Redford taking from his personal desk of the President of the United States papers for Henry Kissinger and for himself, and he went on to be the head of the armed forces. That's the kind of a person who is behind Ronald Reagan's campaign, who can steal from a President of the United States and see what messages are going back and forth. The Hoover Institute is mainly the cabinet that will advise Ronald Reagan. It's filled with czars, it's filled with Nazis, people that have been working towards this Holocaust, this World War III, that believe, in quotes, we get strong by standing up to them, but have made not one concrete contribution that I know of to domestic programs such as solving heroin or cocaine or real unemployment problems or transportation or genetic experimentations. They come out of Stanford research and UCLA, and mind control experiments allow them out of Stanford and pushing moon laws for greed on outer space. The cabinets are very important. Jimmy Carter wasn't so controlled by the Bilderberger and Trilateral. In some ways, as I say, he went against them once he was in office. Would Ronald Reagan go against them? No, because he's going to be 70 years old. He's a 9 to 5 president, and at 5 o'clock the decisions are made. From 5 till 9 in the morning, the major decisions can be made while he snores and sleeps, and as somebody wrote in the paper, watches Laverne and Shirley. Another problem is the women behind those men. What about Rosalyn Carter, and what about Nancy Reagan? Well, there you have a standoff. I think both those women are equally strong. There's a good article in the San Jose Mercury today, The Savvy, the Secret Women Behind the President of the United States. And that is a subject of many, many hours of discussion and books to be written. These men don't simply get into the White House and find themselves in bed with a chick, and she's his companion while he manages the Congress and the judiciary and every level of the United States government, the police, the FBI, the CIA, the National Security Agency. This woman is a co-partner who has been screened by the intelligence community. She is an iron woman. The soft days of Bess Truman were over, where the wives took a back place. I think Eleanor Roosevelt was fairly her own woman. She had her ideas of some things, and Franklin went his own way. But the important thing is that Nancy Reagan and Rosalyn Carter are women of steel that have very important decisions to make. I'm not sure that if we investigate farther and farther the narcotic connections and the bookkeeping connections, and all of the real control over Jimmy Carter is in the hands of Rosalyn, who sits in on all the briefings and knows everything the president thinks or does. And Nancy Reagan was handpicked, a woman of strong will who carries this old, decrepit man around and powders him up and looks at him adoringly. But don't underestimate Nancy Reagan in terms of supporting Ronald Reagan to get him into that god-awful office for goodness knows who, for multinational corporations and weapon machine systems, and they've used these women. Years ago, we thought of the women as being a weaker breed than the men. I think when we look back in the history books at Jacqueline Onassis and Nancy Reagan and Rosalyn Carter, we find some very, very strong women. I don't think Mrs. Ford was that kind of woman, and she was so drugged and out of her head. If she wasn't that kind, I don't think she was a manipulative woman with Gerald Ford, and she was easily controllable through the drugs. Incidentally, there is a book out called The Second Lady. It sounds fascinating. I heard Irving Wallace on radio this week talking about it, and the question comes out of doubles of First Lady being substituted by the KGB. and put in the bed with the president, because only then you know his inner thoughts and how they could train a woman. And I could transpose what Irving Wallace is saying in that book and substitute, if the KGB could do it, so could Reinhard Gehlen and Nazi intelligence and the Defense Department. And I always believed that Jacqueline Onassis was not really the wife of John Kennedy, that she was in the White House. When he became senator, she married him, and that she was in the White House with a dual role, going back and forth to Aristotle Onassis. Before the assassination, he was with her. Afterwards, he had his German crew. I don't want to go in the details of Jacqueline. I can do another whole hour on that, and I've mentioned her many times on previous tapes. But transposing this view that Irving Wallace has of a Russian in the White House, the intelligence community can't put women in bed with the president, and then the ultimate secrets are known and transposed and given to them about what they should do, and the advice of presidential meetings. The women sit in. Nancy Reagan would and will, and Rosalyn Carter does, and they have a lot of control over the men. So the issues that I consider important are who will get us into World War III, housing, education, the use of the media, medical control, genetic control, the cloning, the DNA, the admission now of genetic control, mind control as exemplified with Jonestown and other experimental stations that are going on, our transportation costs, the throwing of organized crime, mass drugs into the major cities of the United States today, the Moon Treaty, the justice, this appointment of the Supreme Court, what are your chances of employment, your relationship to countries with dictatorships, your health, your ability to have abortions, the occupational hazards, all of these things, religious freedom, the cost of weapons and warfare, and the cabinets behind these men and the women behind the men, and also two other things, their view on political assassinations. Would they keep opening up who killed John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King, or would they cover it up? Ronald Reagan would not be subtle. He would cover it up. He did when he was on the Rockefeller Committee investigating the CIA. Jimmy Carter took a hands-off distance from the House Select Committee on Assassinations. He didn't praise it. He didn't comment on it. He didn't stop it. He stayed neutral. I think a neuter is better than a gun-ho in a case of an emergency like that. So in conclusion, whatever basis you make your votes upon, you just go ahead and do it. But these are the issues that I see. I won't have to repeat them again between now and the election. This is how I feel. I add these up, make a scoreboard, and see how they stand, and then vote. I probably will vote for Jimmy Carter because I feel that Ronald Reagan is a threat to almost everything that I've listed here before, based on what he says now and on his past experience. In the meantime, this is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California. You take care, and I'll be back with you next week.